different set of tools, and they potentially enable me to think very differently about how to structure something that uses OVN as the engine that could. So I'm going to go into that, cover a few sample apps that I think demonstrate, oh, am I not loud enough? Oh, sorry. Demonstrate the, this one seems to work pretty well, though. The types of apps, because not all kinds of apps would be really amenable to being OVN-centric. But I'm sure all of you can imagine when you think about OVN, wow, if I had this to work with, I can think of some types of app that just kind of really map well onto this kind of infrastructure. So that's what I'm hoping to show. And then as a result of digging into this stuff, I think there's some potential enhancement proposals. I don't understand them well enough, but I'm hoping that if I put them out there, then the people who do understand will say, oh, okay, and that kind of thing. So I don't have that ready, but I'm hoping in the next few weeks actually for 2.7 to make some proposals. And they're around these 3 steps, what I'm calling FQDN DNS, fully qualified DNS names, logical trunk ports, I'll get into, and the virtual client cloud, I'm going to just hand wave more. Okay, so my background is, I've been around for a while, and luckily, just through, really it is luck. You never know what job you're going to end up on, and these days you can really consciously decide, I want to have an OSS-centric career. But back when I started, that wasn't really a big deal. But I just happened to fall into the X window system, which I think was one of the coolest open source large-scale projects. I think it created a lot of the energy and knowledge around how to manage open source projects, multi-company, commercial interests, non-commercial interests. And after that, I kind of kept working on open source stuff. And then I moved into the kind of more protocol interop. And I know, I'm not proud of this, but I participated in a bunch of interop efforts, which gives you a lot of perspective on how the sausage gets made. And then I switched into media systems and worked on something which I think was really interesting. It was an attempt to unify how cameras and video cameras interchanged more than photos. It was the beginning of people were wanting to do slideshows with music and all that. So that was great. Followed on. And now I'm coming back to this. All right. So now, I figured I can't really talk about the details of what you guys are doing, but I can throw out kind of like hand grenades that hopefully have some anchoring to get you to think about. Okay, so serverless is a kind of useless word. It's buzzing around, but it's very clearly on the server side. So I said, well, let's make them an analogous word, clientless. Because the way I view all of this technology, it's amazing technology, but it's really focused on the data center, on managed environments, on stuff that happens, if you're thinking about AWS, from when you hit that tier of web servers that are gatewayed. And whatever's on the other side of that gateway, there be dragons. There was the talk about network engineers having visibility into their network. I think the worst part of your visibility is the minute it goes outside the data center. So, and so what I imagine is, what if you had, just like you had a VPC or a virtual server cloud, at least conceptually you could imagine some of the benefits of the cloud in the client-side environment. And so, let's go. So when I look at the efforts of OVN going into, let's say, 2.7, 2.8, This is my attempt to lay out directionally. So you could say, you could either be going towards the data center, which I'm labeling serverless, or you could be going towards the client side, access networks, SD-WAN, that whole world. Or you could be going up the stack to orchestration, high availability, or you could be going down to things like P4 and eBPF. And what I'm proposing is that there's big opportunity on the client side. Or at least, even if you don't want to call it the client side, the stuff where the edge of your cloud happens. And that's where you get into the gateways, and my Wepoq is attempting to start the movement of elements that are external to the data center and OVN to be able to, at least at different levels, just like we have on the data center, where you can be unmanaged, semi-managed, fully managed endpoints. Why can't we have that on the client side? Okay. So, and this is I actually did this morning, because this stuff is slowly coming together in my mind, and I apologize if it doesn't fit well. But what I'm trying to say here is, on the bottom, you have a user agent all the way at the left. Some guy, you're sitting there on your laptop, your iPhone, whatever. It has the potential, Apple, Android, Mac, they all provide a VPN that runs on the host. And that's usually the way that, or the next, and then there's a gateway. So either of those could shunt the end user traffic onto an SD-WAN or onto a managed environment. But that's not the usual case. In most cases, the UA just connects through the raw access network and finally eventually gets to the server gateway, which is where they enter the managed environment on the server side. So it would be the gateways on the AWS network or whatever, the L3, L2 gateways that are on the edge of the OVN network or the provider networks. And then finally, and what I'm trying to show is then on the other end, they may or may not go through an external gateway to finally get to the workload. So this is an example where an UA, I know this isn't the common thing, most of the stuff is workload to workload, but let's say you want to have a managed endpoint, which is a user agent, and it's going to get all the way to your workload, like a web server. So these are kind of like the big steps they go through. And then what I'm showing in the lines on top is like the default is what happens. Your phone talks to the first hop gateway, right? Like your consumer router. That thing somehow meanders through the access network, eventually gets to a server gateway, which is on the edge of what we are all concerned with, goes through the VPC, which in this case is just a flat VPC in the first row, then gets the external gateway and it's out. In the middle one, that's the my take on what SDN is, WAN is they quickly shunt the user traffic from the edge in a branch office or like, Road Warrior, and they shunt them right onto the VPN. They are able to go all the way to the server gateway because all the stuff in between is encapsulated, and they're into the server-side cloud. But that's still, it's baroque, it's arcane. From what I've read about SD-WAN, it just makes my head spin. And I see this really, really simple world where you just have that same thing, the first hop. What if the first hop was some way to get onto an OVN logical topology? What would that mean? All kinds of things would change, that's for sure. And if you had IPsec in 2.7, the security issue goes away. There's all kinds of things where you say, there's not that many obstacles to making that whole SD-WAN mess, at least in the consumer environment, go away. Go away, sorry. Thank you. I should have taken the... all right. So that was kind of like the context, the big picture, what I could imagine OVN growing into. So now, what's Wepoq? So if you go with this idea of OVN end-to-end, then you would say that everything is part of the logical architecture. Okay, if you dig into that a little bit more, then separate from that, Wepoq really started out on the client side. I was interested in peer-to-peer applications, low latency, and I wanted to just have it work down on the networking layer. I didn't want to have all this baggage on top. So everything in Wepoq is in OVN. If it's not a Wepoq app. I mean, you could have other parts of your system that are external or bare or whatever, but really Wepoq tries really hard to say that every part of your application, every endpoint, every logical structure directly maps to OVN. So, and some things that fall out of that is there's no external traffic, there's no L2, there's no learning, everything is known, everything is controlled. So let's look at an example. So this is really dense. This is trying to get and how am I doing on time? Pretty bad? Oof, okay. So I will not get into this, but what this is trying to explain is this is all kind of natural stuff. Wepoq defines a natural hierarchical app and DNS, and the DNS being regular allows you to navigate through the routers and switches. Everything is named. All the routers have a name. All the switches have a DNS name. And I won't get into what's going on, but there's some work to make it OVN native, but not much. So this is the part that's more interesting to you folks. So looking at OVN, you know, I struggled to figure out, like I remember I read some article by Scott Lowe where he was saying, trying to understand GRE taps. And I only understood it yesterday when I reread his article for the third time. And so a lot of his stuff is like that. But I think there's this is trying to show that CIF, the thing that was added in OVN, is really cool. But it's a new idea, because it's like, and I hope I have time for this. Okay, so OVN has trunk ports. They're not called trunk ports, but the way that the traffic from the VM, a container VM, gets into OVN is basically through a trunk port. It's just this little trunk port and a trick. So that trick is really cool, and I think it should be generalized, and I think that you should think about any time that you need to get multiple links in through a single link into OVN, you can use a logical trunk port, and right now the signaling is done through VLAN tags, but what I'm doing in Wepoq is I'm in a sandbox environment. If you're running on iOS, your app can't create a netdev, but it can tweak the source L4 port. It can decide, and so we use the L4 source port as the equivalent of the VLAN tag to tunnel into OVN, and I even have a picture of that. So I'll just jump ahead. Okay, so what this picture is trying to show on the left is Wepoq, and it's those two, WH1 and WH2, are two mobile phones. They're running two apps. Each of those apps opens sockets, TCP sockets. Those TCP sockets have a source L4 port. The BR Wepoq is the one that then does the mapping from the L4 port to the VLAN tag so that it can then appear to be coming from the nested container. And after that, it's all OVN says you're good to go. So that's the little trick that Wepoq uses, is it makes itself look like a nested container, even though it's an external app. It has to be one hop away, or it has to be running one of these iOS or Android VPNs, which only work at L3, by the way. So all of, basically, this is, I had another slide, IP-VLAN and Mac VLAN. IP-VLAN especially uses a single Mac, shared Mac, so does Wepoq. And this last slide, oh, fine, oh, cool. I'm doing good then. I had to jump over a bunch of stuff. So and this is very sketchy. I really apologize. I wanted to get further in, but it's hard hacking and working with this stuff. I mean, you guys are amazing. I mean, until you actually try to do it, you can hem and haw. But on the other hand, once you get into it, it's really well structured. Like I was trying to pack it in order to understand the DNS proposal. And once I finally found it, I said, oh, okay, this makes sense. All right, so the way I see the logical trunks happening is through, what you have to tell OVN, I'm using the northbound right now. I'm not having any external tables. So on the port, on the LSP, you just add some fields that say, when you see this inbound MAC address with these protocol port L4 pairs, then you know that it's actually the LSP that this external ID is hanging off of. I mean, it's pretty, and then SB would generate a table maybe to make it more efficient. But the basic idea is pretty straightforward, just like VLAN. Okay, so this is my son's dog, and he's got a pack, so the idea is we need to carry more stuff. Okay, so the DNS proposal, so do you say Newman, or what's the name of the fellow that has the Newman. So Newman has got a proposal for 2.7 on DNS, and you provided some feedback, and I'd love to see it move along. But the one thing I would love to see is, rather than just the host name being matched, that the FQDN be matched, because then you can do it cluster-wide. Right now, you can only resolve names within the subnet. And that's it for that one. And then on the logical trunk port, I'd like to see the container ports not be treated so specifically, and so we could use different methods of signaling. And I think there's some interesting potential. Right now, it's a little bit kind of, it doesn't feel quite right that the trunk port just looks like a regular LSP. There's nothing on it to show that it's different. So even if there was like an external ID or something, so you could, I mean, you can infer it by searching for child ports that have it as the parent. And then the last one is this idea of what does it mean for OVN to better support external endpoints, user agents. That's the way I think of it. You have servers, and then you have workloads, and then you have user agents. We're people, we're not workloads. And that is it. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I see a lot of excitement in your presentation and your body language. We have time for questions. If anybody would like to ask a question, please come up to one of the microphones.
Yes, it will be.
So, where does the name Wepoq come from?
I just made it up.
Oh,
it was the web in your pocket.
Ah, okay.
Because originally the design was for Wi-Fi hotspots that you could carry around, and those would be the first hop routers.
I see. I see. It's good. It's always good to see when you've built something and somebody uses it for something completely unexpected. Guru, you have a question?
Right. So the alpha force signaling that you talked about, right? So in this case, the ports are fixed. So the application sort of needs to reserve that port when it starts up. So it will only be for those specific applications.
Yes, so applications need the ability to control the choice when they make the socket call. They have to specify the source port from the ephemeral range. And that's why this is that's why this is much better for client side, because clients don't care about their source port. Servers care a lot about what their source port is. So, that's it's them. I think it's also applicable to the server side, but yes, it is. They have to be able to choose it. But most applications can, or worst case, for the badly behaved ones, you can always remap them at the host. But not in the mobile environment, unfortunately.
It's funny, I have a little bit of a double E background, and so whenever I see you write VCC, I immediately think supply voltage. We have... we have time for another question if anybody has one. All right, let's thank our speaker.